Hey, everybody, welcome to my tarot book chat. My name is Jenna Mallon, and I have a very, very special guest that I'm super excited to have on today. Please meet the author of this amazing new book, The Neuroscience of Tarot, by I want to I get it in my head. I'm so sorry. Siddharth Ramakrishnan.
Perfect.
He has a PhD in neuroscience. He's an artist and educator. He's a chair of neuroscience at the University of Puget Sound and a recipient of the prestigious National Science Foundation Career Award and W.M. Keck Foundation Award. He's an avid tarot reader for the last 20 years. Siddharth explores the intersections of science, art, and mysticism. And this led him to design and create the Neuro Tarot deck, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, inspired by the Major Arcana of Tarot, but also infused with neuroscience concepts. He also runs a blog offering neuroscience insights for tarot readers. You can learn more at brainmystic.com. I will pop that up here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the invite. It's a real pleasure.
Absolutely. It's not every day that a unique book on tarot comes up. So when I get a very interesting intersection, I'm all for it. And let me just ask a little bit more about your background in neuroscience. Like what are some of the maybe the specific concepts that you particularly teach or that you do research in?
I teach mainly a lot about the introduction to neuroscience, which spans from how the cellular circuit level of neurons function all the way up to cognitive neuroscience. And then I also teach a lab-based intensive course where people get hands-on and like open up animals and look at their brains. And also in my senior seminar, we discuss a lot about neuroethics. So recently I've been talking more about brain privacy issues, and like how do you decide when someone is conscious or vegetative and things like that. So like the hard questions of consciousness and things like that.
Ooh, that's actually the hard question of consciousness is actually a term with which people talk about that kind of ghost in the machine, which you did mention briefly in the book that I was like, the ghost in the machine. That's really interesting.
Yeah, in the sense that I think a lot, the neuroscience, they say, is one of the youngest scientific fields. And for a long time, we as scientists have been, to understand the issues, we've been taking things apart and looking at it from the smallest bits and kind of building it up. But then now at a point where we want to understand those larger questions like consciousness, empathy, how we relate to each other, the breaking things down is no longer working. So you really need to bring in philosophical concepts, spirituality concepts, mystical concepts in order for us to kind of discuss this in a much more nuanced fashion almost.
Well, I think that brings me to my next question. Tell me a little bit about your tarot journey. You've been reading for 20 years. So which came first, the tarot or the neuroscience or, you know?
I think the neuroscience came first. I actually studied to be a computer science person, but always I wanted to model animal brains or human brains. So that
Mhm.
kind of led me into the when I came here for grad school, I promised myself that I was going to take animal behavior courses and learn more about animals, and that kind of deep dove into neuroscience there. Um, and then my sister at that point, about in 2001, gave me my first deck of tarot cards. And then we used to do readings with each other. And I'd never, even though I'd grown up with astrology, I'd
Mhm.
never experienced tarot in India. So this was my first foray into tarot. And then as I learned more about the brain, I was started wondering, okay, what could be going on? Like, how can I be so rational in some levels, and then
Mm,
at the same time be open to these esoteric practices? And so, what
right.
could be going on? That's kind of how I started getting into it.
I think that's what makes you really unique, and I do wonder if that has to do with some of your cultural upbringing, which you talk a lot about, or just the idea of like the cultural construct from whence you come, right, creates layers of meanings of what you notice or not notice. But I think other other cultures, like the Indian culture, may be more comfortable with straddling those concepts and not feel like they have to necessarily rectify them. You can.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like there's the Indian Space Research Organization. Before they sent a spacecraft to Mars, they had a whole religious ceremony where they prayed to everything, right?
It's so
And
cool.
then we have a festival every year called Navratri where we pray to the Mother Goddess for 9 days, and then on the 10th day we literally um, clean all instruments. And my dad, who's a surgeon, they clean all the surgical instruments and kind of thank and pray to the instruments that we use in our lives.
That's
And
he's like, "Thank you to the scalpel. Thank
yeah,
you, scalpel." Oh, that's really cool, actually. I love that.
So it's not something. So it's something you watch or like on an everyday basis. So there that
Mm,
disconnect isn't there. Um, but then even in the Western world, like we talk about scientists being super rational beings, but um, we have these what I call it rigs, which are where we record brain activities,
yep.
and a lot of people have rig gods. They make like a little wax or a clay model, and they'll put it on top of their rig, and before they do an experiment they'll be like, please let this experiment work. A
I
lot of us
love
do
that.
it. They don't talk about it in their scientific journals or papers, but if you go to many of these scientific labs, you'll see a little rig god where people actually like worship it in some levels.
Now I wanna do another scientific study where it's like the control group who don't pray, but are of a similar background, and those that do.
Yeah, and it's not just praying, right? It's also certain. You'll see in some scientific articles, like how did they do the experiments? They might
Mhm.
be like, we washed this thing 13 times,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and there's no reason for that 13 number, but except somebody did it once, and since then everybody ritualistically follows that because they know it'll work, and someone has
Mhm.
told them, if you do it 14 times it doesn't work, you do it 12 times it doesn't work, you do it 13
Right.
times. So those kind of rituals are kind of embedded into, I think, some of our human psyche,
Mm.
and it kind of spills over into, the scientist is still a human, so it still spills over into the scientific world. Yeah.
I think it's beautiful, and as someone myself, I'm a professional reader full time, but I'm also very scientifically minded. I find that it's hard to express that I kinda have a foot in both worlds, and I don't need to rectify it necessarily, but I get tons of people that love tarot, love to read tarot, and they're like, "Well, I'm a judge, or I'm a scientist, or I work at a lab, and no one can ever know." You know what I mean? And I feel, like, sad about that because, what you've done is really special, but also a lot of people would have been afraid to do something like this in your, traditional, "Oh," I'm like, "Are you tenured? Is that why you could do this?" No. Um, but, like, people would be afraid of the judgment, from other scientific, colleagues and whatnot. Was that ever a concern for you?
It's interesting you brought that up, because I think it took me almost like a two-step level to break through that self-imposed barrier. The first was when back in 2008, I was feeling very disillusioned with my science. Like I was very feeling very selfish about if the experiments worked. I was very happy with it. I was stuck in a basement and like just being very insular about how science, and a lot of science works that way. You're just wedded to your experiments and you're hoping it works or not. And then at that point, I really missed my art practice. I had
Mm,
been doing a lot of art before, and I kind of put it aside. And I met a good friend of mine now, Professor Victoria Vesna at UCLA, and she has this art science. She had just started this art science network at UCLA, and so as a scientist, I started collaborating with artists. And that was kind of the first barrier almost that broke through, saying, you know what, you can be a scientist and an artist at the same time. It doesn't have to be this two separate cultures. It used to be
right,
one culture at some point, but
right.
education has kind of split us apart at some point.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
um, the philosophers used to be the scientists. The
Yeah.
religion people used to be the scientists, like Darwin and Mendel and all those people used to be the scientists.
Mhm.
And But somehow it's split at some point, and the breaking through in that art science world really helped me, saying, you know what, I can be more courageous about this. And
Mhm.
then that led me, that's kind of what led me into when I was reading the tarot and wanting to find those correspondences between tarot and the brain. I was thinking, who is going to help me draw this? And I was like, well, I can do it. I'm the scientist, I can do the art, and let me do it. And that's kind of how I said, you know what, it's okay, I can just be out about this
Mhm.
and put it out there.
Yeah, and in your website that I have down below, if people want to order the deck that you created, they can do it through the website, right? Which
Yes.
is like it's your art, but you're talking about the neuroscientific principles that you're kind of connecting to the major arcana, correct?
Yeah, so it's the major arcana, and how that corresponds to different concepts in neuroscience.
That's
And
so cool.
just like you have astrological or kabbalistic correspondences, is like the neuroscience parlance of that. Yeah.
There's a deck you might really like. It was a kind of a homebrew deck by I think it was like I forget his name, Daniel Horn. He did the physics of tarot, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
wonderful because every card is a physics concept. And I've read with it, and I'm like, this really actually still also works. It's really wonderful. But I want to talk a little bit about your book. I know that there's some questions coming in. I'm going to give it a second until we kind of get into the book a little bit. Um, I really love how Llewellyn kind of made it look like almost like a textbook in the way that it's formatted and the way the pages are. I think it's really a unique choice. um and I love that you're not dumbing this down for anyone. Like, you are assuming that the reader reads tarot and is a very intelligent person and is curious to expand. I really appreciated that approach. I
Yeah,
do
I mean,
want
like, we all
to
have brains and we're all curious about it. And I
yeah.
feel like scientists sometimes have this thing of, oh, we are more of the authority. I just don't think that's true. Everybody has access to all, needs to have access to all this information. So,
I agree. And I feel like I loved how you talked about areas of the brain that are getting activated through a reading, and then also activities and exercises that people can use to kind of feel that within themselves. Because I feel, even though I'm not a neuroscientist, I do a lot of what you said in the book. I was like, oh, yeah, that's how I teach. Like really look at the cards, like the visual, like really notice them. And so one of the things I do with my students, I won't even use tarot. I use like a game system that has other images
hmm,
to force them to look and stop running to the keywords in your brain. Like that actually will short circuit where your mind wants to maybe take you in that image. So I
hmm.
loved that you said that. And yeah, visual and mental imagery. Why is visualization and mentalization so important? Like I loved that you went through that. Um, I did have a question for you. I've got so many notes. I'm like, which notes? Where do I want to start? Um, Oh, I really wanted to talk about a little more about what you said about you talked about the novice versus the experienced, and you talked about surgeons who do that, and that the person who's more experienced has a more complex brain
Hmm.
activation and integration going around across different spaces. And I was like, wow, the caudate nucleus is the main intuitive integrator. Tell us a little bit more about that. I think that's just so fascinating.
Yeah, it's a lot of the study on intuition and how intuition has works has been done either on doctors or on athletes. And the idea is that if a doctor is opening up a body and suddenly there's a bleed through, they need to know quickly, almost within seconds, where to stop the bleeding. And an expert will almost intuitively know, okay, this is kind of where it's going to go, and I need to put a patch over there. And almost within a second, they are able to do that, as opposed to a newly, like a Grey's Anatomy doctor who's like coming in like saying, if the bleed is here, then I have to look this up, and then that means that that artery is being cut. So if they start logically thinking about it, it's almost like a 15 to 20-second delay in thinking about like how, where to go and what to do next. And so a novice is relying mainly on memory and studied things. So that's, you're only using like 2 or 3 parts of the brain. Whereas the expert who's been going through this many, many, many years is actually using multiple parts of the brain
Right.
simultaneously. And the main integrator of all of that is that caudate nucleus, which is right in the center. And that's really your intuitive integrator that's there. And that is not activated in the novice, it's only activated in the experts.
That's so
So
cool.
even though as beginning tarot readers we're looking at that little white book, flipping through, it's okay,
Mm.
because that's the only way you're going to kind of learn and over time become better and better at and becoming more of an expert. And also, I guess, looking back and reflecting and, okay, was my intuition right the last time? Did I make a mistake?
Yeah. Yes. We talked about that. And I just wanted to show everyone, like, he really goes into like aspects of reading and where on in the brain mapping it is. So it's really super interesting. I love that you said that. And I also wanted to talk about, there was something I learned completely new as I was reading your book that shifted for me, and that is the difference between intuition and insight. For me, maybe because I've been doing this for so long, my insight is also very fast. Like the ahas come the
Oh.
minute and it's like, and then people ask me, well, exactly where do you see that? I'm like, kind of all of it. But I love that idea of really expressing to tarot readers, like, let it go and then maybe sleep on it and come back. And then that insight will hit. Like it sometimes needs time, right?
Yeah, yeah. It looks like the reflexive, which is like very quick, instantaneous, intuitive parts of your brain are different and distinct than the reflective, where you're kind of looking for that. Okay, why did I make this choice? Why
Right.
did I interpret this card that way? What little symbols did I connect together to make that commentary? So so that insight bit might be something that you have to hone in on a little bit and really think about a little bit later. And it's almost like a difference between your subconscious and your conscious. Your intuition is your subconscious, where you get all the information, but without being consciously aware of it, you just blurt out, this is what it is. And then conscious, you think about, okay, why did I make that choice? And then you then consciously think about it a little bit to get that insight.
Isn't the inside a bit of the aha too? You have the information, but some part of your brain reformulates it in a new way. And you're like, oh my God, I could do it this way. It's like a part of creative thinking, right?
It totally is, and they say a lot of times that you need to let your mind wander in order to get to that aha moment
Like
where
sleep on it. You got to sleep on it.
sleep on
Yeah.
it, do your dishes, take a shower or something, and that's kind of when it hits you.
That's so strange, isn't it? How that operates. I think as tarot readers, one of the things I try to discourage readers is just doing email readings or writing readings, because we're keeping it in this way that's very logical and not maybe allowing that inside intuitive to process subconsciously on its own. So I'll say things like, if you're fighting for it, like, let it go
Mm.
and give it time. It may hit you, but the more you try to consciously like shove it into meaning, you may not be allowing these other parts of your brain to do what it does. Would you say that that's accurate, or?
Yeah, I think you're really getting that. I think in Sanskrit we say the mind is like a monkey, right? So if you're trying to wrestle the monkey, it's never going to work. You just need to, like, tease it, or, like, let it walk away, and then
Let it steal your sunglasses. Like, okay.
and then get to it. Yeah.
I also really loved how you talked about, let's see here. I have so many things. Um, Um, ah, I love, because I'm a pro reader, I'm always interested in the art of reading for others. And I
Mhm.
love that you made sure to put that in your book and not about that. And then you talked about, because I talk to my students, like, to read tarot, you're like doing things on many levels all at the same time. This is why after 3 hours, you're tired. It's a lot harder than people realize. You're processing so much. And I loved how you talked about social perception, mirroring, and mentalizing
Mm.
as an additional kind of layer to just the raw reading of the tarot. Do you want to talk to us a little bit more
It
about
wasn't
that?
in my first draft of the book.
Oh, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Oh.
But yeah, but I was really thinking about it because it's almost like a transactional psychology is what's going on when you're doing a tarot reading, because it's not just an individual. Usually it's always this one person reading for the other.
Right,
And
right.
I really wanted to think about, is there any evidence for this? And it looks like people are you just this conversation, like what we're having is I need to first have a mirror of you in my head in order for me to understand what your expressions are. And then it's almost like building another replica of you in here, and then you're mentalizing like, what are your motivations, what are your desires, and then that's kind
Mhm.
of where you're able to say, okay, this card means you need to be making this behavioral choice or something like that.
Mhm.
So it's the first step in empathy, and we all have it and we all like use it, and that's a really really important bit in the tarot transaction that we have going on. Yeah.
I thought that was really, really great. And it's such a dance too, because as a reader, you can't be, you have to be sometimes more like a doctor. You can't mirror it too much. You need to have that grounding and stability, which you talked about as well in your book. I want to get to some of the questions because we've got a lot of conversations happening. So I'm going to put these up here. So Jonathan is thinks of the impact of the scientific group that has made a perfect model of a fruit fly. Ah, yeah. So briefly, you have any thoughts while we have you?
I think this is great. I mean, in the sense of till now, we were able to record or find connection between individual neurons and circuits, and you're able to like say talk about just a little niche in the brain. But now we have the ability to kind of say, okay, expanded wise, who is connected to what. The only problem is that it's still not. Um, it's a more of an anatomical model as opposed to when A is active, what all gets activated by A. So it's not like the functioning model of things. So, but it'd be really cool. So now that we have that anatomical model, like how that then moves on into the functional aspect of things, it'd be really cool to see about it. Yeah.
That's really great. And then we have the more intuitive me. I used to journal my readings. I started vocalizing them and recording them, and it helped open things up for me. That's really interesting. Can you speak to that? Like shifting the way that you're maybe expressing or, laying down your insights. Does that shift how they lay down within your brain or your own
It might be interesting because it might also allude to what kind of thinker you are, whether you're using more of
mm,
your own, whether you're using more verbal skills or mental imagery skills, like visual imagery skills, in order for yourself to visualize certain things. And sometimes find that vocalization brings awareness. So even though you are thinking about something subconsciously, unless you put a label or a word to it, it doesn't it's not talking to the aware part of your brain. So putting it
ah
into words actually might make it kind of come up into your conscious levels.
That's really fascinating. Actually, this question also makes me think about what you really talked about a lot in the book too, is that it's also a body experience. You really, really talked about that a lot. And that's what I tell my readers, like tarot is an embodied practice. It's not all just up here with just the keywords plotting it in. That really you have to pay attention to your what your gut, like your physical feelings. All of that is information that's arising in a session. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, and so we normally talk about our external senses of the sight and sound and touch, but there's also you have internal sensors all over your body. So we use so many metaphors to talk about. I feel butterflies in my stomach, or I
Mm.
feel lighthearted. So what does that really mean? It actually is talking about whether you feel your stomach like compress in anxiety, or you feel your heart clench in desire. So literally, you can feel those. And those are being sent to your brain, which then says, oh, my body feels this way and I'm going to attach this particular label. Yesterday in a talk, I was kind of doing a very simple exercise of asking people to shuffle the deck and put it into 3 piles, and then pick a pile. But before they picked a pile, they're like, why are you drawn to, say, pile 2 and not pile 3? Like, is there like a tingling in your fingers? Is there like,
Yeah.
what is making
Yeah,
you
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what is pushing you towards that? And if you
That's
avoid that sensation and say, no, I'm forcibly going to go to the other pile, does it actually, is it hard? Like, why is it hard?
that is a brilliant activity that I'm gonna have to do that, because that's what I do. Like, I put my hands over, and then I can feel it in my hand. There's a pressure that is released when I grab the right card. What would it look like if I intentionally didn't go for that?
Yeah, and
Wow,
somebody
that's
yesterday was talking about, some of us feel it here, and
yes.
someone yesterday said they actually felt it here, like almost like
Uh,
a release, the pressure release. They actually felt here. So different people actually feel the tension release of picking that thing differently, and some people are just not even aware. They're like, it's just a random thing. So, but it's good to be aware of how you're choosing all these things.
I love watching my clients choose cards because everyone does it differently, and it's always so fascinating. Everyone gets the same set of instructions. Some people, it's like very doing. Some people, they'll take clumps and put them, and I'm thinking like, I'm always curious, like, is that giving me a kind of brain profile in
Mhm.
the way they have decided to choose just the cards before we've even looked at them? It's so fascinating. I love it. Let me see. Do we have so someone was asking whether you had heard of the drawing meditation called the Neurographica.
Hmm.
Are you aware of that at all? No? Okay.
No.
Well, we'll look at it. We'll look it up another time.
The
Sorry.
one of the things that started me on this journey was the Voyager tarot deck. They had that deck had an instructions of picking a card of the day, setting an intention, and
Mhm.
writing it down or doodling about it. And I was going through a part of my life where I was kind of just living without any intention behind each day, and so I really started picking a card and then doodling quickly and then throwing it out on Insta or something, just so that I would have like accountability of I'm going to do this day. And
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that's what this particular
Yeah.
thing refers to. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not aware of it either. But I feel like that there's some of the questions, there's so many questions. Someone was asking about psychic ability, and I don't think that you talked a little bit about that, but not much. So I feel like this is more about, and I think this is just as important, that idea, that intuitive and insight piece. Though I did want to talk about prediction, right? And the, the way you smile, like I just know that you love this, and I love it too. So I mean, I could geek out with you all day on this. Honestly, like I had you on for my own personal but how, and this is really fascinating, because how it can hinder sometimes the reading, because we may predict and then the cards don't match what the brain is about to predict, and then it's like your brain is like, like it didn't do what I wanted it to do. um and you did something called the anticipatory reading activity.
Hmm.
Oh gosh, and then you talked about overfitting. That's, I use a different word for that, but you adjust the reading to fit that initial idea that you wanted, despite which came out. I think, where do we want to start in that whole kind of nucleus of,
Well, one thing to know is everybody's brain is predictive, so
right.
you cannot lead life without prediction. But mostly in the science world, we talk about almost immediate instances. So, when I wave my arm, I know that it's going to, if I have a certain velocity, it's going to move from here to here. I kind of need to know. And if it doesn't, I'm like, oh, okay, what's wrong? Like, why didn't it move that much? There was a resistance. So you're constantly predicting almost at that instant level, constantly. But you also plan life. You have to have some predictive parameters, so you're always thinking ahead about what could be happening. When I turn the corner, is there going to be a coffee house? Is there going to be something else? So your brain is always planning for it and then course correcting all the time. So you're wired for prediction. But recently, there's been really interesting findings on people predicting things 6 months or said, a year down the line on which
Isn't
song is going to be the most popular
is it the
or
neuro forecasting?
yeah,
Was
yeah, the
that
neuro
it called? Yeah.
forecasting. So it's almost like we are wired for even longer term forecasting or predictions, even unaware. So even like some of these predictions where conscious brain is not aware that you know what might happen, but your unconscious brain is telling you that that is probably the most likely scenario that's going to happen.
Mhm, mhm.
And this is kind of really new research. So we just know there are some parts of the brain that are better at predicting positive outcomes, and some which are the nucleus accumbens, and then some which is like insula is more better at the negative outcomes. So if you want to avoid certain things, maybe you want to pick between two cities to move to, and the negative say part of the brain is saying, don't go there,
Huh.
something is off, and
Huh.
it's kind of predicting that almost.
You're giving me a thought about this. Like, some people are like more glass half full or half empty. Maybe the half full versus empty, these two parts of their brains are just stronger at being able to do that better, which is why they lean that way.
That's a great you know what? So I keep talking about science affecting tarot, but this is kind of the other way around, right? So now we have a really interesting idea that we can now explore and like, oh wow, maybe we can test it out and see if the activation patterns of these people will be like different or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Though I do have like what would it take for us to get someone who's reading tarot to get in a functional MRI as they're reading tarot? Who do we talk to? How do we I would love to see this. I want to see what happens with someone who's like a really good, very expert tarot reader, Mary Greer, someone like me, someone who's been reading for a really long time where the stuff isn't going to mess them up, I
Mhm.
would love to see everything light up and where and how. How do we do this?
I'll find out. So I've been going to the Society for Neuroscience meetings like for almost 20 years, and recently, and each year I kind of the last 3 years I've been showing my neuro tarot cards, and this year the book was kind of the preview copy was there, and there was a lot of interest. So I'll try and find out if we can find like a collaborator, kind of do something like that.
That
Because
would be so cool. I don't mean to like rope Mary Greer in, Mary, if you're listening, like I'm just saying. Um, so so the more intuitive me, she said something like that. Knowing the camera was filming and I had to say something, I would start defining the card, and then all of a sudden the meaning becomes clear to me. So I think that was kind of like verbalizing it so it kind of raises up, but also like a predictive piece starting to kick in, maybe.
mm, mm, mm.
Um, so let me see what else I have. I'll hide that. And then let's see here. I'm trying to, I think that might be, there's some that are a little deeper, but I want to kind of stay on track with the book. I really, yeah. So the whole prediction piece, and also how predicting can get in the way, because it can be a bias that isn't there. So, someone's like, oh, this guy, right? His name's Chad. He hasn't called me in a year. Is he going to come back? And, and the average person's thinking like, no, but maybe he does. Maybe the reading shows that. So we have to be careful to not listen to that and go, let's wait to see what lays on the table
Yeah,
before we try
Mary
to.
Mary Greer has a really good exercise for that, right? Everywhere she asks, um, how literal are the cards? Like when you pull out the cards, how literally? Like is it going to? Are you like? Are you really interpreting yourself, or are the cards are the telling the story? It's
Mm,
something that you almost need to catch yourself sometimes.
mhm.
um, and then also I guess one way to check yourself is that as you're shuffling, or as you even before you lay out the cards,
Yeah.
have you already in your head made up your mind as to how you're going to answer,
And
or
does
are
that
you going to wait
affect
for
what
the
you pull?
yeah. So you can maybe kind of break it down a little bit and see at what point in your reading are you like getting to that answer, is something to sort of think
Siddharth,
about.
I have noticed that if somebody, like someone who's a client of mine, if they have a very loud fear, the fear of losing somebody, or a phobia, or they're very activated, what I've noticed is that they'll often choose cards that are mirroring their activation rather than maybe a more objective stance. So in my own profession, when I feel that might be where they are, I will offer to choose the cards for them to act as a bit of a buffer. And maybe that is kind of going into that neuro forecasting with that body sense that you were talking about. I think there's so much here. Like we've got you signed up for like probably the rest of your life, like of work here for us tarot readers. So
I do think what you said is really important, that I think as tarot readers, many of us have those grounding practices and before we start a reading, but it might be as important for the clients also to do the grounding themselves, kind of
yes.
their emotional state as well. And that, because that also affects the whole thing. So that's something really important that you touched on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's really, really
And then and then the other thing that's there is we all have that like the frontoparietal circuit that is going to deny. So if you tell me something, I'll be like, no, that's not what it means. You see, that's not what I see in those pictures, right? So I
as
could deny what you tell me. It doesn't matter what
yeah.
you tell me.
Yeah. As a reader for others, I've coined something that I kind of call like the radius of plausibility.
I like that.
And that if I say anything out of what they will think is plausible, then there's this instant like, nah, like you're going to win $1 million. No. Or you're going to be very poor. No. Like that there is this kind of schema of an expectation of what they're going to hear. And if it's outside of that, there's that knee-jerk response to reject it because it's not within a predictive pattern.
Yeah, it's in Indian philosophy. We have multiple layers of like the physical plane, the mental plane, and then the highest plane is Vijnana. Uh, Anandamayam is like the feeling of ecstasy almost. And then they say that the path to ecstasy is through, like, first do yoga to bind the body, then do meditation to bind the mind, then you kind of move through the different things. And then mantras or chanting is a way to kind of approach that higher levels. But you can also sidestep and do to use drugs to reach that plane. But they say be careful, because you might not be ready to receive that information. Right? You might see the outcome or the future or whatever, but you might not be physically or mentally ready to receive it and use it.
You're going to be naked in a tree in a park raving about the conscious cosmos, right? Yeah, that's
So in a
really
way, I'm
great.
wondering, in your realm of possibility, that thing plausibility you talked about, I wonder
Yeah.
whether there's something similar going on where people are just not ready to receive the message.
Oh, that definitely what I've noticed. I mean, we can have so many of these kind of conversations, but that there's often like 3 people that I'm actually reading with embodied in one body. And that is the person who comes in, they have a social security number, driver's license, they have a name. And then there's an aspect called the higher self and then the shadow. And this higher self is usually drug that conscious person into getting a reading because conscious person is being maybe influenced overly by a shadow or resistant part. And so I often find my role is to try to communicate higher to norm before the shadow can take over and basically rewrite the whole reading. It's so fascinating. I can now see it when it happens. So I will say something like, so your reading says that there's going to be a red light. And then I'll notice a shift. And then I will say, repeat back to me what you just heard. Oh, yeah. You said it's going to be a green light. No, I didn't. And it's so crazy how the brain can trick itself. It blows my mind in action. But let's see here. What else did I want to talk about? There's just so much in your book that I just really, really loved and thought was so very fascinating. what else do I have? I wanted to talk about, where do I go from here? I did have a question. So when we talked about visual, imagery and that ability to do that, there are some people who are born without the ability to visualize anything. I would love to find this person and say, who also reads tarot and understand how that works for them.
Yeah, I was pressing in a religion class yesterday, and that's the best part of working in a small college. You can go to like the other classes and talk to them. And there was one kid there who said they don't have any visual imagery. They are aphantasm, I think that's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more verbal, like they have words as opposed to pictures in their heads,
Right.
and even sounds actually make a lot more sense to them than pictures. And even I was shocked to find out that for me, when if you close your eyes and ask to picture a sunset, I can't see like a colorful picture. I see
Oh.
like a little hill, two hills with a little circle, those are kind of like a line drawing as opposed to a vivid sunset. And so we all have different levels of mental imagery, but that shouldn't preclude you, I think, from the tarot bits, I think, because um, uh, I tend to see movement more, so where the story in the tarot is more about an actual scene happening as opposed to those kinds of things that kind of come up in my head. So
Yeah.
that
So
could
it's
be what's going on in different people's things.
like a little Snapchat, like a little TikTok feed
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah, yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
something
yeah. As
from
opposed to like,
the imagery of the cards,
yeah,
it moves
yeah,
in your brain?
yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's so cool.
yeah.
There was someone else. It was Julie says she has synesthesia, and she talks about the other senses, and she said that for her, Queen of Swords tastes like copper pennies.
Wow,
How
wow.
interesting is that?
No, I've not explored that in this book. The tasting emotions and symbols. Um, Yeah, I mean, I would. Really sounds really amazing. It's a different way of experiencing the world. There's a place in your brain where your visual, your auditory, and your olfactory information is all kind of layered, so that you have a coordinated map of the world. And if there's a crosstalk at that point, is where you start getting the synesthesia. So.
Wow, that's really fascinating. That's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing, Julie. So for someone that wants to build their ability to read, to allow their intuition and insight and all of that really come to the forefront as they're reading for others, what would be some of your best tools for them?
Um, I would say definitely journal. Right, kind of keep a record of your readings and look back to see if you can see how accurate they were or not. Even if you're doing reading for yourself, that might be the easiest way. Um, Another simple way would be to kind of jot down the first five things you see about your card, a particular image. It doesn't have to be a tarot card, any image, and then once you write that down, maybe the next day come and notice something new about that image, so that you're not
Mm,
always stuck on the same symbols or symbology, that you're actively trying to look at other things in that particular image. And I think that is going
mm,
to help you understand why you're drawn to certain things and why you're
mhm.
not drawn to certain things. And that will also help you know if that's a pattern that's repeating, like over different cards and symbols and things like that.
That's really similar to how I teach. Like I tell my students, watch your eyes.
Mm-mm,
Notice what you're noticing in the image, because you may find, oh, I'm noticing there's a mountain in the back. I never noticed that. And this came from an insight I had when I was reading professionally. I had a young woman sit down and we pulled a card, and in the image it was an animal manacled to the ground, and I kept looking at the manacle, and I was like, why am I just drawn to the manacle? And all of a sudden it hit me, he was incarcerated.
mm-mm,
So we can use, like, don't, like, you, it's okay to pull like symbols outside of the image. You don't need to take the
mm-mm.
whole thing, and that will be symbology that can lead to greater insights, like to your point. I think. Um, I don't think enough people do enough really looking at the cards because they worry, right? Oh my God, I'm going to mess up. What's the keyword? How do I put this all together? And then we freak out, instead of giving ourselves some grace. But to a question, something I wanted to talk about with you was I really liked this, the hierarchy of structure leading to function, and how you really are just layering these different talents and skills that come into a tarot reading. It's not like a very simple act, is it?
No,
Ah,
no.
you were talking about there was something that I call this reminds me of. So sometimes I will all of a sudden get a memory of my own life in the past, or a person that this person reminds me of from the context of the reading. And I thought you mentioned something like that. I have to go find it. That, we come with our own background, our own memories. And sometimes our brain is going to go and pull a memory that we think may be relevant to what's happening for this other person.
Yeah, this is kind of fascinating. Like ultimately, the tarot card is an image. So if you forget psychic abilities or like energies from outside, it's an image, but somehow we are layering it with it's a person, it's a dog, it's a rose or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're adding meanings to it and associations to it, and then all that is based on your past memories. Like just a dinner table is going to be so loaded with associations of, is it a happy dinner table, is it a sad dinner table, is it a place where you enjoyed yourself, or is it a place you dread? So anything and everything is going to be loaded with your own experiences that you're coming in with, and that's always going to be part of that milieu of reading that you're doing. And it's important for us to like be aware of those experiences that we have. And I think once you become aware of it, and the more you become aware of it, the uh, you will both be able to understand the other person better, but also make sure that you're not overly influencing your own stuff onto
Right.
them, I guess.
Yeah, that becomes the dance, isn't it? Of like, am I overly influencing this or like pulling back? That's certainly true. Oh, Nancy Antonucci is here. She says she feels that the tarot has made her more psychic. And that might be a good question, like understanding, like you do, what's being activated within the mind and maybe even honed in the mind from the practice of reading tarot. Who might you recommend tarot for as a practice to get these other parts activated that normally wouldn't? Like did I make that clear? I just usually, yeah. Like,
Yeah, that's an interesting. I've been meeting a lot of people who are now using tarot as a way to talk to non-verbal autistic people,
oh,
as a way
wow.
to kind of explore narratives, and people who are not able to talk about certain like traumas or experiences, as a way to kind of explore how to move forward with things.
Mm,
Um, I think the other place is again something I mentioned before, the intentionality. If you feel like you're leading life without direction or goals, it might not be a long-term goal, but even like simple, like how am I going to execute this particular task? And then using
yeah.
like tarot cards as a way to set intentions, so that you're way more involved in what's in front of you. I think that's another way I really feel it'll be a good practice.
I Is there anything that I haven't touched on that you want to make sure people who want to pick up your book know about, or something to get them hungry to go right over to Llewellyn's website and like here and like pick up. I'm sure like everyone's like whatever, but it's on Llewellyn, it's on Amazon, it's all the places what you would normally. But what like yeah, what can you like give them a little snack that maybe we haven't yet that they would
Yeah, I mean,
run?
I just think that the brain is so cool and you can really explore it. And I'm hoping the book is kind of lays the ground for you to delve into behind the scenes, kind of get a sneak peek as to how you are being so intuitive and how to become better at it, and how are you layering like meanings and emotions and your body and the other person and all of it, how are you stacking them together and kind
Yeah,
of
isn't
getting.
it? You said the umwelt. That's not
Yeah,
a word I hear often. So I was like, oh, I like that word. It's wonderful.
thank you. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so what's next for you? Like, I know, well, first off, congratulations on your first book. And those of us, I mean, Nancy and Tanucci, those of us who have written, we know how hard what a labor of love it is, and how much work it is. So congratulations. Everyone thinks, oh, the book is done and you can just relax and then go to parties in Brooklyn or something. But really, this is the other part of the work, isn't it? Like just getting it out there in the right hands and the right hearts. So do you have anything coming up that you want to make sure people know about, or other places you're going to be, or any other projects coming up?
Yeah, I'm going to be in StarCon in January in Florida, January
Oh, okay.
26th. I'm a keynote. I'm going to talk mainly about the social cognition and the transactional psychology in tarot. That's going to be my keynote there. And then I just signed my second book contract with Llewellyn.
Oh my God. I still haven't. I'm working on it. I needed to break. I don't know how you kept doing this.
I don't know how I'm going to finish it, but this is going to be exciting. It's about brain magic. So, like when we do
Ooh.
spells, incantations, and rituals, and how each of those magical practices we use, how are they transforming our brain? Is kind of what I'm exploring in that. So,
Congrats. I needed a break, man. I'm working on my next proposal. I gotta get it in, but I was like, oh, I don't know how you're doing it. Is there anything else you want to share? I feel like it's just, man, I want to talk enough about it to make it interesting, but I don't want to get into super, super detail. I want to keep that for our friends to pick up the information. But was there something in the book that I haven't mentioned that you want to talk about,
I
or that
think the
you
only
like?
other thing that we didn't talk about was feeling emotions in different parts
Ah,
of your body,
mm-hmm.
and how you might feel when you're feeling sad. You might feel it as a cooling in your hands, or and kind of noticing those kind of bodily changes in terms of where you're feeling hot and cold and things as you're doing your readings might also be a really important thing to think about. So.
Like the body sense. That's really, really great. Yeah, I have to say I'm not really good at that personally. I don't know. It's just not, unless it's like gut or dread or something, but I'm not as good at those real subtle pieces, at least as a tarot reader. I do more of that as a medium.
Mm, mm, mm.
That comes through. But I will notice sometimes with kind of medical intuition, like if I do feel a tightness or like, oh, my shoulder's hurting, I know it's theirs, not mine. But that's a little different than I think what you're kind of describing, which
Yeah,
is,
and in fact, there are. It's interesting, like how different people have different degrees of it. Some of us feel emotions more for the happiness bits. Some feel more for the sadness bits, and it's different across populations. Again, the sense of awareness, just being aware of it, is going to be a great thing for you to go with.
yeah, I really loved how much you focused on really that self-awareness, like that mindfulness of like what's actually happening here as I'm doing this thing was so important. Maybe for our final question, Jonathan says, what was the hardest chapter for you to write?
I think the hardest chapter for me to write was the one on neuroforecasting because I had to straddle the question of what is precognition and um, as opposed to forecasting,
Mm,
almost like getting this completely out of the world information that you had no awareness of, and
yes.
you just become aware of it, as opposed to getting in all the information subconsciously and then using that to predict something is different.
Yes.
And the lack of tools lack of scientific tools to measure precognition, and this amount of controversy that exists even in trying to attempt those questions. It's a very fraught piece of science that's there, and there are some labs that are exploring it, and other people like hate them, and so it's just that was really hard for me to even like define and write about it, because there's just not much evidence for how to move forward with that thing. Yeah.
Because they haven't looked, like they're really not. When we talk about bias, there's a lot of bias against this that they're not willing to look at, and I find that so unfortunate.
Yeah, and I really believe we just don't have the tools for it. Like, how are you going to measure energies from outside? I mean, there's just no tools for some things like this.
Have you read anything from Rupert Sheldrake?
No.
Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, he's eminent biologist in the UK. I think he's taught at, I don't remember which university, but he did attempt that because he was finally at a level where they couldn't kick him out or something. I will get you that information. I have so much to give you. We'll talk, but this has just been wonderful. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. And everybody, Neuroscience of Tarot, available everywhere. Highly, highly recommend this beautifully unique book that will just make you a better reader and a better querent even, maybe. So get the book. It's worth it. It's wonderful. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for this invitation and
Of
a
course.
really amazing conversation.
Oh my God, this has been great.
All over.
Yeah, I know. So much fun. And thank you everyone who came in live, and have a great rest of your week. Bye guys.